Hi friends, it's Becky, and today I want to do some bead weaving without using any beading thread or any beading needles. Now that's not to say that you can't make this bracelet with beading thread and a beading needle. I used beading thread and a beading needle to make my example using the same beads that I'm going to be using here with one minor difference. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with using conventional bead weaving tools and materials in order to achieve this. But I'm going to be using beading wire because I feel like it today, and the only difference between using the beading thread and using the beading wire is going to be in how you secure either the beading thread or the beading wire when you do that. Because I'm going to be using beading wire, I'll be securing it using some crimps, and I'm using some 2x2 crimp tubes. The limiting factor in what type of beading wire or crimp tubes you're using is going to be whatever you can fit through the crimp tube with 4 strands of that wire. So these are the gold soft flex crimp tubes. They are 2x2. The copper ones I cannot fit 4 strands through, so that would be a limiting factor. I might have to use a smaller beading wire. This is the medium beading wire, and 4 strands of it will fit through the gold crimp tubes when I do that. It's just something, get to know your materials so that you know what you can do with that. For the beads themselves, I'm using beads that came in my curated collection from Beads to Live By for June. The July collection has not shipped yet. It is available if you wanted to subscribe. I'll put a link in the description below and you can check that out. You can also, one thing that she does is she puts together Czech glass bundles that are meant to accompany it. And you can kind of get an idea of what types of colors you might see. So if it appeals to you when you look at the Czech glass bundle, which has been released, then maybe you can sign up and get yourself some beads that are curated to go together. So I am going to be doing this in 2 passes. We're going to go up the first level by putting these tile beads and rulla beads together. So I've got my Czech tile beads, I've got my rulla beads, and then the second pass goes through over the top, and we're going to add some 11-0 seed beads, and in my example I put a fire polish bead in here. In between that, I'm going to be using my 6-0 seed beads from my curated collection for the one that I'm doing with y'all. But just so you are aware, you can substitute your 6-0 seed beads with 4mm fire polish beads, and it works just great for this. So let's get started. How much wire or thread do you need for using a beading thread? Grab yourself a wingspan. I did not have to add any thread after using a wingspan for this, so that's a perfect amount. And I'm going to say you could do the same thing with your beading wire. Just grab one end, hold on to your spool, and stretch your arms out wide. And however much wire you have from the end to where your spool is, that's where you're going to cut. And that'll give you enough wire to complete this project. Alright, and it is going to be 2-stranded. You can do it single-stranded. It would just be, go one side, up one side, down the other, across the top, and then down the other side when you did that. But I'm going to do it both sides at the same time, or both ends of my wire at the same time, because that's just going to be, in my opinion, a little bit easier. Alright, to find the middle of my wire, I'm going to put both ends of the cut ends together, and then when you drop down, you can find the middle of your wire there. I'm going to put my button, this is a tiara cast button that I had in my stash. It's just got a little shank on here. I'm going to be using this as a closure. You could also use a lobster clasp or something else like that, but I like having button closures on some of my bead woven bracelets, and I'm going to go ahead and drop that down into the middle. It can move around a little bit until we get started on putting our beads on. And then I'm going to grab 4 seed beads on each strand of wire. So I'm going to put on 1, 2, 3, 4, and these are the 11-0 seed beads. Whoop! Lost my 4th guy right there. And 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is going to be the same whether you're using a beading needle and thread, or you're using the beading wire, you're still going to put your button on first and put 4 11/0 seed beads on either side of that button and drop it down there in the middle, like that. Now this is where it's going to be different. If you're using beading wire, you're going to grab a crimp tube and put both wires through that crimp tube in the same direction. If you're using a beading thread and beading needle, let me unbutton this real quick and show you. Then grab yourself an 8/0 seed bead and have both of those go through there. Because we're not going to be squishing that 8/0 seed bead to turn it into a crimp at the end. I'll show you how to finish it, or I'll describe it, how you finish it at the end. Because I use this with a beading needle and beading thread, and that just brings both ends of it together at a connection point. And it's going to do the same purpose here with the crimp, but it'll also help secure our wires when we're done with it. And I'm going to wait until the bracelet is finished before I crimp any of my crimps. I just want to have this crimp here, right there, at the start of this, so that it is in place for when I get to the end of this. So I've got my crimp over here with my button, my 4 beads on each side, and I've got 2 ends of my wire coming out of there. I'm going to pick up 5 seed beads on each end of my wire. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And these are, again, the 11/0 seed beads, not the 6/0 seed beads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. See how that gets it separated right there? All right, now for my bead woven one, I started with a tile bead, but for this one that I'm using the beading wire, I'm going to start with rullas. So it does not matter which hole you put your wire through on your rulla beads. Since they are 2-hole beads though, make sure that your wire can go through either of the holes. Make sure they both are clear before you string it on. But I'm going to put 1 rulla on each end of my wire. And again, it does not matter which hole you go through or in which direction for these. And then I'm going to grab a tile bead, and I'm going to put this tile bead on both strands of my wire, 1 wire through each hole. Whoop. Just like that. Scooch this down to the bottom, show you what that looks like. Again, it does not matter like which way these rulers are facing. We will straighten them out on our next pass. And then I'm going to repeat that same thing. A rulla on each wire, and then whoop, the tile bead on both wires. And I'm just double checking that both holes are clear. And I'm going to do this until it's the length that I want. Now I used 19 tile beads for this bracelet. Since I'm switching up the order and I'm going rulla and then tile, I'm probably only going to need 18 of these for this one. So when I get to 18, I'm going to check my length, and I will meet you back here after I've got 18 of these tile beads, and I'm going to end with 2 rullas, check my length, and I'll meet you back here so we can talk about how to turn around, how to make our loop for our closure, and then we can start our way back down along the top. So I have 18, not 17, 18 of the tile beads strung on here, and I started with rulla beads and so I'm ending with rulla beads. And I did just double check before I started. I'm just going to show you that this is exactly the right length for me for that. So if you have a smaller wrist than my 7.5-inch wrist, you may use fewer of these than I do. If you have a larger wrist, you may use more. It depends on what you are doing with it. All right, now the next part is where we are going to bring our strands together. And in the bead woven one, I again used an 8/0 seed bead to put both strands through. I'm going to pick up 3 11/0s on each strand, and then instead of the 8/0 seed bead, I'm going to go through a crimp tube for that. And then we're going to make our loop. So I've got 1, 2, 3 on one strand, and then 1, 2, 3 on the next strand. And again, I'm not going to be crimping this until after everything is finished in case I need to make some adjustments. But I do want to put my crimp tube in both directions, or in the same directions, so they're both coming out away from my bracelet. There we go, like that. Alright, so let's make a loop to go around our button. And on my example, you'll notice I have a fairly long loop. That's because I'm using a fairly large button, and I wanted to make sure it would fit around it and hold it securely. So I had to do a loop that is long enough for that. And that's the reason that I'm not going to give you an exact number on the amount of beads that you're going to use, but I'm going to show you how to measure it so that you can make sure that you have the right amount of beads for whichever button you're using, if you're using a button. I also want to point out that when I did this with beading thread, the beading thread is thin enough that you can do multiple passes through 11/0 seed beads. This medium beading wire, though, it has trouble with 2 passes through the 11/0 seed beads, so I'm going to actually instead be using some 8/0 seed beads for this. So I'm just going to pop some of these guys on here, and when it feels like it's about the right length to go around this smaller button, I'm going to measure it and see how far I need to keep going. So again, with this beading wire, if you're using the medium beading wire, just make your life a little bit easier and use 8/0 seed beads, but you can absolutely use 11/0 or even 15/0 seed beads if you're using beading thread or thinner beading wire that you can get 2 passes of that thinner wire through an 11/0 or a 15/0 seed bead. It's just a real tight fit, and it kind of distresses this wire a little bit for that. This feels like it's going to be way too many beads, so I'm going to test it. I'm just going to scooch these a little further away from the rest of that for the test. I want to bring both ends of my wire together and then pinch it with my fingers right here where they meet. That is way too big, so I'm going to take a few beads off. Let's take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. And try that fit again. And it looks like that fits. Now, one of the important parts of making sure the button fits is making sure that it'll go over and all the way through, not just that it fits this way. And this does. I'm going to take 2 beads off and see if it still fits or if it's too tight of a fit. There we go. And this, nope, that's too tight of a fit. doesn't quite go all the way around. It's a little bit of a struggle. I'm going to add one more back because I took 2 off. Do another test. And that's perfect. So that is my loop. And now I've got it on just one of my strands of wire. I want, again, because we've got a second pass, I'm going to take my second strand of wire and I'm going to go through all of those beads in the opposite direction that that first wire strand is going through. So I'm starting, if this is the bottom and this is the top, I'm going to go from the top down and pass through all of these 8/0 seed beads with that wire. Don't skip any. If you need to scooch them up a little bit at a time, that's fine. All right. Now, I'm going to pull each wire individually until it's almost next to that crimp tube. And then I'm going to put each wire through the crimp tube. Again, I told you that we were doing 4 passes of wire through the crimps. So it's going twice, and now I want them to go another time. 1, and then we've got another one. Gently so the wire doesn't kink. There we go. Now we're going to put this other one through there. So they're both coming out of the crimp tube. And once more, we're not going to crimp until the very end, in case we need to make some adjustments. Whoop, what you doing, buddy? All right. Now that I've got those, I'm going to pull each of my wires one at a time, back and forth, until we can close the distance on this loop. Get all of those next to each other. All right. Now I am going to be okay with a little bit of this wire showing so that there's room on either side of this crimp tube for when we go to do our crimping, because I don't want my crimper to break any of these glass buttons or glass beads. All right, I'm done with my 8/0 beads for now. And I think we're both coming out on this side, so I'm going to go across the top there. I need to get these wires from this crimp tube to each of these rulas. So I'm going to pick up 3 11/0 seed beads on each strand. 1, 2, 3. And also put it through that second hole of the rulas. We've already got it going through one hole. We're just going to go through the second hole. I'm going to do that on each strand, on each rulla. 1, 2, 3. This one is going to go through this second rulla on this side. There we go. That just brings that right up there on that. Now, if you had ended with a tile bead instead of the rulas, the way I got those up there to that second loop was I went ahead and went through those 3 seed beads that I picked up before I went through this 8/0. And then I came out of those 3 after I'd gone around the loop. Let me show you on this end because it's mirrored on the button side. So I went through those 3 and then added an 11-0, an 8-0, and an 11-0, and then went through each rulla. And then after that, it's exactly the same on this side, except instead of the 4mm fire polish bead, we're going to be using our 6-0 seed beads. So let me show you how that works. On one strand, I'm going to string 1 11-0, 1 6-0, and 1 11-0. Just double check that that's going to fit. Nope. I'm going to need 2 11-0s. All right. So it's 1 11-0, 1 fire polish bead, and 1 11-0 if you're using fire polish beads. But because these are a little bit shorter, I'm going to need 2 11-0s. The 6-0, and then 2 11-0s. I just want to be able to bridge that. And if I'm holding it this way and these are my top and bottom, or if you're holding it this way and it says right and left, my top or right, the one that this is coming out of, I'm going to cross over diagonally to the other side of the bracelet and go through the rulla on that other side. Like that. Then I'm going to take my second strand and I'm going to pick up 2 11-0 seed beads, and I'm going to pass through the 6-0 that I just added, just the 6-0. Bloop, there we go. So it's coming out of there. And then I'm going to pick up 2 more seed beads and go through the rulla that is on the other side, the one that's next to the one I just went through, that first strand. So we get a crisscross like that. Now you can see it's already doing it. It's starting to make a little curve in here, and that's perfectly fine. I actually have that going here where I've got a curve, and that's just going to help it not turn around and rotate when it's on my wrist. It doesn't like to be straight. It does like to have that curve. And that's going to be perfect for when I'm wearing it. So I'm going to just repeat that one more time with this. You can rotate those rullas up so that they are on this side of this. Move that strand out of the way, and I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to pick up 2 11-0 seed beads, 1 6-0, and 2 11-0s. Like that. And since I am coming out of this rulla here, I'm going to cross over my tile bead and go through this rulla on the other side. Just like that. And then I'm going to take my second strand. I'm going to pick up 2 11-0 seed beads. Go through my 6-0 seed bead. And that would be your fire polish bead if you're using that instead. And then pick up my 11-0s. And go through this other rulla, the second rulla, the one's right next to the one you went through. And I'm going to continue doing this Actually, I think the bend there is sharper than this bend, or is it? Yeah, this one has more slink to it. I think I might change my mind about this. I cannot put a 15-0 right next to the 6-0 because it will get swallowed up. But what I can do is pick up a 15-0, an 11-0, and then the 6-0. So let me just undo this part real quick, and we'll see if I like the way that that fits and looks a little bit better. It's totally okay to make changes to your designs if your beads aren't fitting right. You can even make changes to other people's designs if your beads aren't fitting the way that theirs are. Because while there's a lot of consistency in seed beads, sometimes the different manufacturers' seed beads are different sizes. And they look different, and they fit differently. So let me try that with the 15-0s and these 11-0s first. This is just a little bit of a class on troubleshooting real quick. So let's spill out some of these 15-0s. I'm going to pick up one 15-0, an 11-0, and a 6-0, and then an 11-0 and a 15-0. So that they are sandwiched like that. Let's get a little closer so you can see. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did before, crisscrossing across the tile bead to that opposite rulla. I'm going to go ahead and go in. Yeah, I like the way that that fits a lot better. So let me grab the other one. It's going to be a 15-0 and an 11-0. And I'm going to go through my 6-0. I'm just going to say you don't need the 15-0 if you're using a 4mm fire polish bead. It should fit just fine without that. That 15-0 just adds a little bit of extra spacing to make up for the differences in my center bead that I'm using. You could use a 4mm pearl as well. That one might be a different size, so try out using an 11-0 plus a 15-0 or just 11-0s on its own. That's going to add a little bit of color to it. Let me do a second one just to verify that I like the way it looks and I like the way it lays and how it fits together, because you can't always tell just off of one. And again, it's 15-0, 11-0, 6-0, and then 15-0. Cross over to the opposite rulla, the one that is catty corner. It is a kitty corner. What do you guys say? Do you say kitty corner or catty corner when it's something that is across but diagonally from you? One more. And there we go. Oh, see, this is a mistake you can sometimes make. And luckily I made it for you so I can show you. On that second one, you don't want to also pick up that 6/0, and you want to do your other seed beads separately. So I was not thinking, and I picked up all of those ones that I would do just for the first one. For the second one, we just want a 15/0 and an 11/0, and then we go through the 6/0 that we just added, then pick up an 11/0 and a 15/0 and go through the rulla. Alright, I'm going to repeat this until I get to the very end. When I get to the very end, I'll show you how we're going to finish this up. Spoiler alert, we are going to finish it up by doing some crimping. Yes, that is a more graceful curve, and it matches better with the curve that I got on this one. So that's a much better fit for this. Alright, I'm going to keep adding these, and I'm going to keep going until I get all the way to the end, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, so now we're going to work our way back across the top of this by taking one strand and adding one 11/0, one 6/0, and one 11/0 to that strand. And then if I'm coming out of, if this is the bottom and this is the top, if I'm coming out of the top rulla bead, I'm going to cross diagonally over this tile bead and go through this bottom rulla over here. And then the second strand, I'm going to pick up one 11/0 seed bead. I'm going to take that strand through this 6/0 seed bead that I just added. Like that. Add one more 11/0 seed bead. And then I'm going to take that strand through the rulla that is across and diagonally from that, the rulla that it was coming out of. So it's just crossing over the top of the tile bead, and the strands go through the same 6/0, but we have individual 11/0s for that. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you can see this a little bit easier for the second repeat of this pattern. So if I'm working with the strand on the, if this is the bottom of the work and this is the top, it's coming out of the top rulla. And so I'm going to pick up an 11/0, a 6/0, and an 11/0. And if you're using fire polish bead, just substitute the 6/0 for a 4mm fire polish bead. So now that that's been added, I want to go through the rulla on the bottom row, the next one over. So I'm going diagonally across my my tile bead. Going through that one down there. Like that. Now if I wanted to, and this is totally optional, I could do the next one with this same strand and then come back through with the second strand and just add my 11/0s and go through my 6/0s. I'm not going to do that on camera with y'all, but it is an option. I would just continue going and I'd crisscross my way across the different rullas like that. So here's where I need to add my extra seed bead, and it's just one. And then after I've picked up that one seed bead and hopefully not dropped it, Once I've got that, I go through that 6/0, pick up another seed bead, and go through this rulla. And when you go through the rulla, you're going through the hole that doesn't already have stuff in it. It's the open hole, the second hole. So I'm going to repeat that all the way across. And when I get to the bottom, I will join you back here and we will crimp both of these edges, because remember, I left them uncrimped in case we needed to do any adjustments. So we'll do that, and I just wanted to give you a little look at what it looks like when you use the fire polish beads on this. And they look like that. Okay, let's finish this up. I have finished making my little X's over the top of this bracelet all the way through to the end, and you'll notice here it wants to curve. So if you are noticing the same thing, let it. It doesn't need to be straight, it doesn't need to be flat. When it's worn, it's going to curve around your wrist. So go ahead and let it do what it wants to do. We're just going to have it be itself. Just accept it for who it is. But this one also curves. This is the one that I used beading thread on. It is still pretty stiff, but not as stiff as this one. We are using beading wire, so it's going to be a little bit stiffer than one that you use with beading thread, but it doesn't need to be a supple bracelet. It can definitely be this bracelet doesn't like swing around and look slinky. It is a bracelet that stays put where it's at. Now, if you recall, we did not crimp either of these yet. So before I finish up the rest of this, I am going to make sure that this is as tight or as loose as I want here. And I'm just going to use my fingernail to kind of wiggle between the crimp and these beads, so there's a little bit of space. You can see that space there between the crimp and the beads next to it, so that when I come in with my crimper, and I'm going to use a magical crimper, it won't crush those beads. So you want to be careful still, because you are right next to glass beads. But I'm going to be using my magical crimper on this, and if you notice, if you've never used it before, there is this concavity on both sides of the magical crimper, and this only works with 2x2 crimp tubes and 0.018 2.019 beading wire. This is actually with 4 passes. It's a little bit thicker than that, but that's just fine because that's more meat for the ravioli, more wire for the edges of the crimp to dig into in order to hold it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to center my crimp tube right in that concavity, and I'm going to wiggle this around to make sure that I don't have any glass beads inside that same area. I'm going to do one press, and it presses just the corners of that crimp tube, and I turn it to a different angle, make sure it's centered again, and then a different angle, and each time I squeeze after I've turned it at a different angle, it's going to take those corners from that first press and smush them down against the rest of it and leave me with a nice little crimp ball. That's why I like the magical crimpers, and I will just add this caveat that if you've tried them and they don't work for you, it might be the crimpers, not you. This one has always just worked for me. I tried a recent one recently that I had got my sister, and as much and as long as I tried to use it, it just wasn't giving me a good crimp, and it's probably the crimper, even though I was using the same wire I always use and the same crimps I always use. It just wasn't working, so it's not you. It might just be that you got a bad one. And if that's the case, go ahead and return it and maybe try a different one. Alright, so to finish this up, I've got one strand coming out of each of these rullas. I'm picking up 3 11-0 seed beads on one strand, scooching them right up against there. And then I'm going to take that strand, and this is going to be a little bit fiddly because there are all these beads in the way. But I'm going to pass it through that crimp tube. Remember, this is an uncrimped crimp tube over here next to the button. I just crimped the one next to the loop, and I'm using my finger to give myself a little bit of space around there, because it'll also, in addition to, there we go, in addition to making sure that we don't crush our beads, it'll give me enough space to be able to leverage in these other strands of wire. So now I've got that in there. I'm going to do the same thing with the second strand. And again, it may be a bit fiddly, but it is doable. I've got another 3 seed beads. And I'm going to just pass it through that crimp right here next to the button. And I know there's enough room because I've done it before, because I can see the space. Nope, that's not going the way I want it to go. Come on, buddy. The other end. There it is. I found the other end. Sometimes you just have to get it in enough that you can grab the other end and pull it through. Alright, so now that I've got all of those, I'm just going to do one last pass like this. Let's wiggle this around. Get that fingernail between those beads around the loop and the crimp. And now I'm going to crimp this right here. Again, make sure that you're not squishing any beads before you squeeze down. I'm going to try that again. And each time you rotate it, also be careful that you're not squeezing any beads in your crimpers. Ta-da! Let's cut off our excess wire. Wire cutters, there they are. Alright. And now we've got a bracelet made with the tile beads, some rulas, 11-0s, 6-0s, and a few 8-0s for a loop. On this one, my 8-0s were just some of my connection parts, but I used 11-0s for my loop on this one, and firepolish beads instead of the 6-0s. And that's what they look next to each other. This was from a previous curated collection, and this was from this last month's curated collection. But I love them. They are great bracelets. Let me know if you want to try them. I'm going to put a link in the description to the curated collections on Beads to Live By. You have until I think it's the 12th or 13th. It's going to be on the website, the actual information to sign up for next month's curated collections. If you wanted these, they are available for purchase actually for with the club extras. You can either do individually or maybe the whole thing, but I'll put a link to that on the description below. And if you like what you see, hit the like button. If you want to see more, hit subscribe. And I will see you next time. Have a happy beading. Bye.